Well, here we are again moving to another principle, and maybe for those of you part of the video crowd, this has been a break period for us and hopefully for you too, where we're reassembling. And I just want, once again, as we're reassembling, thank the Wesley community and this congregation for hosting us. I want you to have a desire to come here and see this place if you've never been in the sanctuary of Wesley United Methodist Church here in Lexington. It's an absolutely beautiful sanctuary. And I have the privilege, as maybe you can see on the screen, of standing in front of the Alpha and the Omega. And I was talking in the break about what a wonderful pulpit area that is and how I'd love to be preaching from that pulpit, because it is just a grand place, immaculate in every other way, and we're grateful for the genuine friendliness and hosting of our people here at Wesley, our brothers and sisters in Christ. But we're moving now to a third principle, the Episcopal principle. And under that, we want to try to cover maybe some issues around itinerancy, general ministry, and some things maybe to do in regard to annual conference. But let me tell you, as I've said earlier in the presentation, that the Methodist Church is Episcopal in its structure and its DNA, if you please. In fact, at one point, it was known as the Methodist Episcopal Church. And then we had the Methodist Episcopal Church South, the Methodist Episcopal Church North, the reunification rite in 39 in that regard, and then later the uniting with United Brethren in 1968. And here we are at the juncture we are today, still Episcopal. In fact, I might call your attention to the discipline. If you were to look at the Constitution, it has the articles within the Constitution in three different sections, and Section 3 is restrictive rules. And if you look at Article number 3, under Section 3, paragraph, it would be 19, in the discipline, it says the General Conference shall not change or alter any part or rule of our government so as to do away with episcopacy or destroy the plan of our itinerant general superintendency. So as long as the Methodist Church exists, if you please, with this Constitution, there will be Episcopal leaders and Episcopal leadership. The church has determined that that is significantly important to who we are as the people of God. Now, let's keep in mind that John Wesley, whom we call the father or founder of Methodism, was not a bishop. John Wesley was an Anglican priest. When he died, he was an Anglican priest. Now, when the beginning of the Methodist Church, I'm sorry for being tongue twisted there, but when the Methodist Church, if you please, was organized in 1784 at the Christmas Conference, Francis Asbury, whom Wesley had sent to America to lead the founding of Methodism here, was elected an elder, was ordained as an elder, and at that same conference was selected as a bishop. Now, history says that Wesley was not greatly pleased about that decision to elect Asbury and co-bishops in the church, and yet they felt that the need they had in America was somewhat different than what Wesley was experiencing in England, and believed that was the direction the church should be going. And of course, the church has gone forth from that point, and I just pointed out to you the Article 3 of Section 3 in the Constitution, restrictive rule. Let me just talk about that for a moment. And once again, I'm sure that what would be really helpful is some dialogue around it. But bishops are elected for life. So when you are elected, unless you somewhere along the line really do fail, not just in your administration, but in your moral character, and there are no charges against you, you will remain a bishop for the rest of your days. But the bishops also have a mandatory retirement age. And it's sort of, I think, convoluted a little bit in the way it's stated. Now, if you are an ordained elder, you have a mandatory retirement age of 72. So if you have reached the age of 72, you retire at that next annual conference. It's mandatory retirement. Now, a bishop is an elder, but because they have been consecrated to the role of episcopal leadership, the discipline says that they must retire at the jurisdictional conference nearest their 68th birthday. So that age varies. Some bishops may retire at 69, and some bishops, if you please, may retire at 71. It depends on where your birthday falls in regard to that disciplinary requirement of retiring at your birthday that's nearest the annual or the jurisdictional conference. So I've stuttered a little bit in trying to say that, but I think you get the gist of what I'm talking about. So we have Episcopal leaders that we believe have been set aside and remain aside even though they move into retirement. And then we have others who are in the active role, and they are persons assigned to various annual conferences in what they are doing. A bishop has a main assignment of appointment making, and I covered that a little bit earlier in regard to appointments, but that's the main responsibility of a bishop, is to make appointments. Some people would call that the significant power of a bishop. And even that's in print in some of the material you've been reading. I sort of steer away from that kind of language. I don't like to think about office having power, because often that's conceived in a negative kind of way. We need to have power mostly by influence and not by position. And I would hope that we do not have people in the role of episcopacy who enjoy the idea that they have power because of their position. And appointment making should not have power in the sense that you are unduly influencing some people, like your colleagues in ministry, your ordained sisters and brothers along the way. And we should, I think as Episcopal leaders, never be making appointments based on likes and dislikes, people who agree with us and don't agree with us, and those sort of things. I would hope that we could become a kind of Christian community that would talk about that if we felt that that was being the case, that we could care enough about one another that we were able to dialogue about it, to actually bring it out and talk about it and discuss it. And I said earlier that appointment making should be bathed in prayer and consultation. I'm one who experienced, for example, a conversation with a bishop on one occasion when he was inviting me to take on a role beyond the assignment I had in the local congregation, and he invited me to speak back to him about where I was, and I said, right now I have a great deal, and these are the words I used, I have a great deal of fire in my belly for this congregation. I'm not sure my work is completed here. As I think about it and pray about it, I'm just feeling I should be here. And the bishop honored that conversation. It was consultation. And I would hope that district superintendents, in dialogue with staff parish relations committees and also with local pastors, not just meaning local pastors in position, but any pastor in a local situation. And there is serious consultation around that and a lot of prayer so that we are able to discern together what happens in appointment making. I'm hesitant to go into the details of appointment making because they vary so greatly as to how a bishop may go about, if you please, figuring out where each clergy person needs to be for this next assigned year. And we do make appointments based on the annual conference year. And so no person is appointed beyond 1 year normally. Now we can assume that given circumstances remaining similar, a person may remain in that appointment for an extended period of time. But they are not actually assigned beyond 1 year at a time. And we know that tenure is important. I'm sure that every cabinet with their bishop thinks about tenure. For example, lots of studies have been done on very healthy congregations that are doing very well in its outreach, in its mission, in its ability to communicate with people and draw people into the fellowship. And among those studies, it has been determined that every one of the healthy congregations studied has had a pastor with long tenure. We can't say that long tenure creates healthiness, but we can say that studying healthy congregations, long tenure has been one of the ingredients for health. You see the difference of what I'm saying there. And so I think a lot of bishops look for tenure. I made no apologies for saying in North Carolina that in my vision of the annual conference, I long for the day when every person assigned to a local congregation had at least a 10-year tenure there. Because I do believe that tenure is a significant ingredient for good health. And I could tell you many, many stories about our strategies in regard to that. Part of the real issue of tenure in the United Methodist Church is that we have retirements every year. And so we have maybe 10, 15 retirements in any given annual conference. And we need to fill the places of those retirements. And so it creates a real challenge to maintain tenure and yet deal with the number of retirements that you have in any given year. That's been a real challenge. I don't think it's a challenge we cannot overcome, but it is a great challenge nonetheless. I've talked with presidents of seminaries and deans of seminary. For example, our seminary at Duke does not have a president of the seminary because Duke Divinity School is a part of Duke University. And it's one of the schools of the university, if you please. So the university has a president, but the school, the Divinity School, has a dean. And I've spoken, for instance, with the dean and some of the presidents of seminaries, and I've asked this question: where did climbing the ladder come from? It's like the chicken or the egg. Which came first? Did this idea that clergy are to climb a professional ladder, did it start in the seminaries? Or did it start in the church? Where was it that it all happened? Where was it that we began to believe that the larger number of people you serve, the more it spoke of your effectiveness, the more convinced people would be of your abilities and talents as an ordained clergy? I don't think it's in the scriptures anywhere. I don't think you find that at all. I long for the day when we could have more and more conversation about that subject, and that we feel that whatever assignment a clergy person might have by the bishop to a group of people, that those people become the most important people in all the world. And I would hope, and I dreamed of this in saying to my clergy in North Carolina, I want you to go there as if this is going to be the last congregation you ever serve. Give them everything you've got and approach it as if you're going to be there the rest of your days. And then equip them, those of lay ministry, equip them as though you're going to be leaving next month. Help them to be all that they can be. We know biblically that we are called to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry and to share that ministry. It's often a strange thing that happens in our local congregations that we don't say it, but we sort of think in the way we make statements that we hire clergy to do our ministry. Pastor, that's what we hired you for. And that's an unfortunate statement. That statement should never be made. We did not hire clergy to do our ministry. We hire clergy, if you please, and we really don't hire them, actually. We receive them and we undergird them financially. As Paul said, the worker is worth his hire. But we undergird them with financial support so that they can be the spiritual leaders that they need to be. I've sensed that sometimes clergy get into the trap as a result of that kind of mentality of thinking they have to prove their worth. And so they try to do it by doing the work of ministry, by doing what lay people are baptized to do. And then they try to report it. Like I've reminded clergy again and again, when you go to an administrative board meeting the temptation is to tell them how many visits you made, how many funerals you've had, how many times you've spoken, and how many times you made visits and calls. And what does that really tell you? What is that really measuring? It may be sort of a way of trying to convince people that you're not lazy, but what does it really tell them about effectiveness? You know, we in the annual conference for a number of years gave away all of these awards, and I affirm this. I mean, I think we need to recognize and encourage people, like in evangelism, an evangelism award for being a great evangelist. These are the ways we are marking that you were a great evangelist. And I'm not condemning that. I'm simply saying, would it not possibly be more meaningful to the annual conference if maybe the person being recognized or honored, instead of talking about what they've done, having a product of what they've done? So at our annual conference, when it came to the evangelism recognition time, we brought up a new convert and let that convert give his or her witness of how they came to Christ and how our Lord, through the Holy Spirit, used maybe a clergy person to bring them into this relationship. That can be so exciting. I'm off the subject here just a little bit, but I'm going to tarry just a moment or two longer, if I might here. I don't mind telling you a remembrance I have about, I'll just call him by his first name, Donnie. Donnie was a drug dealer and a very successful drug dealer. And one of the people that worked with him or alongside him was killed in a drug exchange. And as he was dying, he made Donnie promise that Donnie would take care of his wife and his little boy. And in his dying moments, Donnie promised to do that. And I got to shorten this story a little bit, but Donnie was with the little boy, bringing him home from school one day when the little boy mentioned this new stone church. We had a church in the country near Durham that had burned to the ground, and they built it back, and it was a stone building they built back. It's absolutely gorgeous. The little boy was so fascinated by the new stone church and the steeple and so forth. He wanted to go in it and look at it. And so they went in it, he and Donnie, just to look. It happened to be a Wednesday evening, later after school for whatever assignments, I don't know. All I remember is that when they were inside, tiptoeing around like you might do in this lovely facility, Donnie heard the pastor, I'll just call her Grace, that was her first name, talking about Jesus in a group meeting that she was having. And for whatever reason, she was talking about who Jesus was. And he was caught by it and struck by it in the narthex, the lobby area. So he listened. And as it ended, she came out and he's still there. And he said, "You don't really believe that stuff, do you?" "Yes, I do," she said. "Yes, I do." That can't be true. It is true. The conversation went that way. And Donnie gave his life to Christ right there in those moments. And what I want to tell you is, earrings and tattoos, I'm sorry if you have tattoos, and I'm sorry if you have earrings more than a couple on your ears and so forth, but Donnie was well adorned with big earrings and tattoos everywhere as I remember him. And he was so excited when he met Jesus that he couldn't sleep that night. And so about midnight, he called his mother in another major town in the north to tell her he met Jesus. And he said, "Mom, I got to tell you, he's real. He is alive. He is a real person." And she said, "Donnie, I'm telling you, these drugs are going to ruin your mind now." And she was thinking he was high on drugs because he was saying this kind of stuff. Called his brother even after midnight to tell him about Jesus. I'm telling you the background of that to say that on the evangelism ward day, we brought Donnie to the pulpit. And Donnie told his story and told us about how much he loved Jesus and what a difference Jesus was making in his life. And can you imagine how that inspired that annual conference to go home and find Donnie's and Jane's or Linda's or whomever you might put there in the name like him? It was amazingly different when we see the product of what we're about. And we can yearn for that. I know that as some of you who are going to watch this video are going to have to pause and say, you know, our local congregation has not made a new disciple in 10 years, in 8 years. I can't remember anybody as an adult being baptized in my church for a long, long time. I hope that will drive you to your knees, not in negative mourning, as much as knees that believe that God answers prayer and that you begin to pray for Donnies and people like him, male or female, young or old. You begin to pray that God's Spirit will move out on them. We're Wesleyans. We believe in prevenient grace. We believe in God going before us and speaking to the hearts. I don't know who might have been praying for Donnie. I have no idea, but I suspect in my theology that somebody had been praying for him and the Spirit was already moving with him, whether he knew it or not, that he was willing to be receptive to what grace was saying to him about the Lord. And wow, I don't care where you are in your local congregation with your building, there are people around you that are not a part of it. And if you begin to pray for them by name, I believe to the depth of my being that God will move on those people and you will have an opportunity to be a vessel to bring them to Christ. As I say, I'm a little preacherly here and off the subject a little bit, but I did want to bring that before you as you think about what happens in these kind of times. And so the purpose then of the bishop making an appointment is for the betterment of the lighthouse and the work that they are doing in that regard. And to realize that actually that person is being appointed to a community. So again, many bishops have gone to the idea, I'm appointing you not to a local building, but to a community. I'm appointing you to have spiritual responsibilities over this group of people we call certain congregation. But I'm appointing you to be a spiritual leader in your community. And if we all began to hold hands or be of one accord, if you please, on that idea, it may be a significant thing in what we could do in our vision for the community. that God is up to something far more than we can imagine. And if any of our churches ever forget Ephesians 3:20 and 21, they need to go back and read it and remember that God promises that he will do far more abundantly than even we know how to ask or imagine. And if you study those two verses, you understand he's going to do that miraculous work through us. Look at the contents of those verses, and you'll see very clearly that God is not going to do it outside of us, but in us, if you please. And then, of course, you know that one of the responsibilities of the bishop is to ordain persons who the Board of Ordained Ministry have determined are ready now for that next step of ordination. The bishop, hopefully, is one of the leaders in carrying a vision for the people of God. There are different translations say it in different ways, but Proverbs is very clear in the King James Version that without a vision, the people will perish. Other translations that maybe are more accurate on the word is without a vision, the people will wander. They will be lost. People will grope. They will be in every direction. And we can understand from life itself how important it is for spiritual leaders like a bishop to help people with vision so that they are able to see a piece of what God is up to for them and with them in that regard. Now, let me just move a little bit from that role of the bishop over to, as I said, I'm not wanting to delve into the idea of appointment making that much because it varies so greatly. But it is a challenging thing that I particularly long for lay people to understand. We have what is not stated in this way, but with other language in the discipline, guaranteed appointments. Now, I'm going to be a little biased here, and this is Al Gwinn telling you his opinion, and you do not at all need to be in alignment with where I am in that regard. I was privileged to chair a General Conference study. The General Conference asked me to chair a worldwide committee of 26 people on the study of ministry. And in that study of ministry, we determined that it might be helpful to the future health of United Methodism for that guarantee, if you please, to go away. That actually for an ordained elder to have the promise of a place, regardless, as long as there was no charge against that elder, was not the best thing for an annual conference. Now again, I may be lobbying here a little one-sidedly, and please understand that. But we presented that to the General Conference, and the General Conference passed it to do away with that obligation the conference has to appoint that person. And it was raised for reconsideration, and the reconsideration failed. And then they asked for a declaratory decision from the Judicial Council. And again, the biased part is coming through here, but after 4 years of community of representatives from around the world studying this issue and making its recommendation, and the legislative committee agreed with the recommendation and brought it to the General Conference, and the legislative committee had agreed so strongly that the decision of the legislative committee went on a consensus category. It didn't even have to be voted on because it was so overwhelming in the legislative committee. And so the General Conference passed it because it was so overwhelmingly supported. And then when they asked for reconsideration because some disagreed, it went back for a vote, and it was not. They were not willing. The General Conference was not willing to reconsider it. Then I've built you up to say the Judicial Council of nine people ruled it unconstitutional and tried to attach it to some of the Constitution, which many of us disagreed with, and it was not allowed. Let me use a quick illustration of what I'm talking about. Suppose I'm in a dilemma that I have a rural congregation made up of rural people who are of the rural culture. And they are unique, like every other culture is unique. And I could go on. I mean, their English may not be the strongest of some other cultures, pronunciations and so forth. I could define the culture. Don't let me dig too deeply there. And they're desperately in need of a strong pastor. They are in an opportunity. They have an opportunity to really reach out into their community. The community is expanding and growing, and it's really key that they have a right kind of match. And I have a local pastor who came up in that kind of environment, and that local pastor is very strong. They've proven their skill sets, and they have giftedness for ministry. But I also have another person here who's an ordained elder. And this ordained elder grew up in a church of 3,000 members. And they know what church is for 3,000 members. They have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people coming in and out of their building. They grew up in the city. They attended some of the finest schools. Their English is flawless. They love the busy life. They enjoy being near a theater. They love the choice of restaurants being significant in number. And I want to appoint them. But now I have to make a decision. Who goes to this rural church I've just defined? But I can't make a decision. I'm forced by the law of the church to take a person out of their setting and put them over here in a foreign setting and culture that I know in common sense is not likely to be a good match. And that was the dilemma. And you all, as lay people particularly, and even clergy will be watching this, I appeal to you to keep in mind what is most important about expanding the kingdom. The protection of somebody's job or the welfare of a congregation. Now, I say some of you need to be behind the pulpit and present the other side of that. And I'm sure there are other sides. We've considered all of those. But that also influences occasionally. If someone in a local church senses something like that may be happening to them, they don't need to be angry and now sort of frustrated to the point of wanting to get at the bishop, as much as they need to understand part of who we are in our disciplinary requirements. And people's hands could have been tied, and they had no other choices. But we do have a choice. We do have a choice. we can say, as lay people, and I'm a person who sits in the pew primarily now on Sunday, we're going to make this work. Under normal circumstances, this is going to be a crash. But we're going to try to prevent the crash. We're going to do everything in our power to help this be successful. I'll never forget talking to a congregation when I was the district superintendent about a pastor that was going to be assigned to them, and I confessed to them privately and confidentially in the SBRC, these are the weaknesses as well as the strengths. And these weaknesses can be a real problem. But I have come to you to ask you, after I've told you the whole truth and nothing but the truth, will you be willing to work with this situation? Because you're the most spiritually mature congregation I may have in my district. And I would entrust this person to you and their needs more than any other congregation I have in the district. And you know, the beauty of that story was they said, let's go. We'll take this person. If they've run over the cliff, it'll not be because we didn't try to stop them from going over the cliff. And they approached that appointment in that regard. So in spite of what I just lobbied for that didn't pass because of 9 people when nearly 1,000 had agreed and 26 had studied for 4 years all about it, and 9 people sort of was able to put it aside, that's okay. We're not going to stay locked in woe is me kind of attitude. Let's say, let's make this work in spite of what may be obvious in weaknesses and etc. So that's my long pitch about appointment making in that regard. It's much more complicated, much more than ever you can imagine. And so maybe the leader will turn off the video and say, okay, let's hear your stories a little bit. We don't have to embarrass anybody. We're not trying to talk people down. This is not our chance to put someone down. This is our opportunity to say, yeah, let's rise up. Let's be the people of God that God has really called us to be. Ed, I'm going to have you turn the slide now, if you will, to our next slide. It's, again, a continuation of the episcopacy, and I've defined that already in regard to the episcopacy. I might just tell you a word or two about the Council of Bishops while that slide is up there. The Council of Bishops was, before COVID, meeting 2 times a year, once in the spring and once in the fall. And that usually rotated among the various jurisdictions so that the council would be in one jurisdiction one time, another jurisdiction another. Since COVID, the council has not met in person. The council meets by Zoom. And that's an interesting meeting because generally there are around 100 people in the council. I should have probably researched this, and I'm sorry I forgot it, but the exact number in the council varies, of course, depending on how many retired people we have that are still alive and how many active people we have. I believe we had something like 65 active bishops in the U.S., and then the number of bishops kept growing in the central conferences, but that ranges somewhere now probably in the high 20s, and counting the Philippines and Africa and Europe, part of Western Europe. And we do have a bishop in Russia, and he's a part of what might be called Peace of Asia. And All of the active bishops worldwide in the central conferences and in the U.S. Are voting members of the council. Retired bishops do not have a vote, only voice. When I was an active bishop, we used to laugh and say, we should turn that around. Retired bishops ought to have a vote and no voice. And I could chuckle about that now, but I'm retired, and so I'm tempted to say, I think I'll change my mind. But you know that I'm joking around that, but we do all have to be careful about voice. But the Council of Bishops is very varied, as you can imagine. I would say there's almost never total agreement on any single issue. And that's not necessarily bad, but it has become difficult to be able to lead in a way that there's not total commitment to the direction that the church may be going under the leadership of the Council of Bishops. But I do believe hearts are sincere, and I can't imagine any bishop that is not sincere in where they are in their desire to lead and be effective as leaders. But the council does not have nearly the ability to accomplish some things that we sometimes think they ought to be doing and accomplishing. For example, no bishop answers to the Council of Bishops. The Council of Bishops has no authority to correct a bishop. The correction, if necessary, lies in the judicial or in the jurisdictional council or college of bishops. Let me say it again because I was crossing words. Any disciplinary action that needs to be handled on a bishop is the responsibility of the jurisdictional college of bishops, not the Council of Bishops. All right? And so if there is a correction needed or an investigation to happen, it will happen in the college, not in the council. The council can make statements, and often does, on many different issues. It's a majority vote when that happens. It does not mean that the council is in full agreement on that letter. The council has no authority over the general conference. In fact, the Council of Bishops has no vote at General Conference, none. In fact, the Council of Bishops individually, as well as collectively, cannot speak to the General Conference without special permission given by the General Conference for that bishop or those bishops to speak. And that system troubles some large industrial kind of leaders, male and female. They do not understand how executive leaders have no voice in how the company moves forward. But that's who we are. That's how we work, and that's how we shall continue to work. Part of what we're seeing, and we need to be patient with, is that in such a time as we are now, a lot of what we have designed through the years is not working. Like in the midst of COVID, who can make a decision for the church to move this way or that way? Nobody. Nobody. The Council of Bishops cannot tell the church to do this or to do that. We struggle greatly because the only group that can do that is General Conference. They only meet every 4 years. Now, just think about that. What if in a local church you had a number of issues happening that needed immediate attention, but the administrative council only meets every 4 years? You'd say, oh, that's sort of ridiculous. That's impossible. That's what we're facing. That's what we're up against. We've got a small group called the General Conference Commission that has the responsibility of setting the date and the place for the General Conference. But that commission, 20 or 30 people, they can only try to use as much reasoning as they can reason to determine we're going to have a General Conference in 2021 in September. And the rest of the church begins to agree or don't agree. And so there's a lot of dialogue back and forth about it. I could go on, and I probably am belaboring this point a little much, but I'm really lobbying for patience and a clean understanding of the dilemma that we're in and a willingness to be a helper and not a hinderer. That is to say, be a problem solver with us. Don't complicate the problem even more. Be prayerful people. Be intuitive. Be a listener. Let's discern together, what do we do in such a dilemma as this? And some people are thinking, well, maybe the best thing to do is just have the crash. Let's just explode. Let's say we've got the protocol. And when some of you are watching this, that may be a moot point, and how grateful we would all be if it is a moot point. But as though this is going to solve for us to divide, and somehow we're all going to be living happy thereafter. But we're the body of Christ. We're the sons and daughters of the Most High. And we have a commission. We're assigned to make disciples of Jesus. We have a commandment to love him with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, our neighbors as ourselves. Our work is great, and we have stalled out because of some of our division. And so I think we all long for a way through this. And I finally want to say I think the way through is God. I think he's the one that has the answer. He's the one that we need to be seeking guidance from. And I dare say that every single one of us will need to lay down our will, and we need to stop the negative talk about the other and become one in Christ in that sense. And the Lord will lead us, whatever that means. I have no idea. It doesn't mean necessarily that we have some kind of artificial unity without real unity. And does real unity mean that we need to be apart from one another? It could be, but it may not. But all of that needs to be in the hands of the Lord instead of in the lobby groups, and instead of the people, whether they be 26 in number or 300 in number, saying this is the way it needs to be. I know the way forward, and it should be my way. So let's have another slide, please, Ed. And I've done pretty much the appointment making. I think the reason I left this slide in from the general slide of the discipleship group was I like the different colors, in the sense that no congregation is exactly like the other congregation. We're all unique, and we're all different. And that's what makes congregations beautiful. And hopefully we see that in one another. And we know that each person is a unique creation of God, and we're delighted that that's so. And we receive clergy, not expecting the new clergy person to be like the leaving clergy person, because everybody's unique. The interesting thing about this is our hearts are not limited somehow in how many people we can love. That's the beauty of how God designed us. I can love you as much as I love another person later whom I haven't met. And when I meet that person and love them that way, doesn't mean I love you any less. I can continue to have great appreciation and admiration for you like I have done before. And that needs to be the spirit. We need to feel that about the congregations, if we're clergy that we've served. We need to feel that way about clergy who've served us if we're in the congregation. So another slide, please. Now, I talked some general ways about the ministry of all Christians. I just put the slide up, though, to help us all remember our involvement. We have ordained clergy. And when we say we have ordained clergy, I want to make sure we understand we're talking about elders and deacons. Sometimes we think only of elders, and that's inappropriate because deacons are ordained. And so ordained persons are elders and deacons. And we call those persons in the church, in the conference, clergy. The clergy members of an annual conference. And they are members of the annual conference because they are ordained. Okay? Now, one little piece of information here. Interestingly, though a council of bishops, when one retires, they remain a member but do not have a vote, in the annual conference, when an ordained person, or elder or deacon retires, they continue to have a vote. So they vote as well as have the voice. And that's an interesting twist in the discipline that is different for one group as opposed to the other group. And then lay ministry that I've talked about in regard to the baptized. And then, of course, you all know as lay people about I'm thinking certification, and you have home missioners. You have various classes there, class leaders, lay ministers, certified lay speakers, certified lay ministers as well as speakers. So there are different categories of ministry. And of course, lay people are all invited to pursue any of those lay areas of interest that they might have, and not feel as though they want to continue on in any one of those roles. When you are ordained to itinerant ministry. And that has become a challenging issue, particularly around appointments. You are ordained and you commit by vows, VOWS, that you will go where you are sent by the bishop. You will go where you're sent. You are itinerant. Now, that can become an issue because I may decide I'll go if there are 4 bedrooms. I'll go if the salary is above $40,000. I'll go if there's this kind of school for my children to be in. I'll go if, and you begin to fill in the blank. That's not itinerancy in its purest form. That's itinerancy designed around your wishes and your wants. Now, that can also work on the opposite side. There can be a congregation that's committed to itinerancy. We're going to receive whomever the bishop sends here. And we can say, yeah, we're committed to itinerancy. We're going to receive whoever the bishop sends here. If it's male, if it's white, if he's male, white, and has 2 children, if he's, and name it. That's not itinerancy. See, itinerancy is not a one-way street only for clergy. Itinerancy involves also the congregation. And are we open to full itinerancy? Are we willing to receive gladly and with an open, loving heart whomever the Board of Ordained Ministry believes is worthy of ordination and the bishop believes is a gifted person that's a match for some of the needs we have in our congregation? Now, probably I'm speaking to most who'll see this video and you are there. God bless you. I'm grateful you are. You are there. You're ready to, you understand. You're not trying to limit itinerancy. Either way, as a clergy person or as a local congregation. But there are many in your congregation who are not yet there. Clergy need to be challenging one another with why are you trying to condition itinerancy? Why? Can you move and tell me something beyond selfishness? Now, I know there are exceptions. I know there are not only wants, but there are challenges, and I recognize that. I mean, and that's why I say it's becoming more complicated to make appointments every single round of appointment making. Many of you clergy have spouses who have professions, and that profession can't be uprooted real easily. I dealt with more than one clergy person that had a spouse who was a medical doctor, and they practiced not only in a private practice but in a particular hospital, and that's not an easy thing. And it doesn't mean you ignore that. Any praying and God honoring bishop or cabinet wants to be on their knees about how do we handle this? What do we do about this? What do we do about clergy couples? Do we see that as maybe a benefit instead of a liability? I think it's all how you look at it in that regard. And there are extenuating circumstances. There are children sometimes who need special help at a young age in their life. And they must be near facilities who can give them that help. All those things. We have hearts. And I just simply mention that we'll keep our heart in the midst of this as well. And I can guarantee you, from my perspective, I don't know a single leader in the role of episcopacy or district superintendent who doesn't have that heart of concern and care. And where there's a will, there generally is a way. And furthermore, we serve a God who is a way maker. When there is no way, God makes a way. So I want to encourage you in that regard, regarding ministry of all Christians. Another slide, if we might, please. Okay, and so the discipline is very clear that the annual conference has a significant and huge role. And it's the center of the various kinds of conferences and committees that we have in that regard. I'm not sure that I want to take you too deeply into what I'm thinking about in regard to these conferences, but you understand the importance of them. And I'll never forget on an occasion when I was much younger, I was in a general conference setting. It wasn't a general conference, but it was with one of our boards and agencies of the church. And by the way, you can look at those and see, and in the master slide list that the Board of Discipleship puts out that you can download online, they have a complete list of all of our boards and agencies. If that could be of interest to you, you could have those, and if they are helpful in one way or another, that would be a good place to retrieve that information. But I'm at one of those meetings, and the General Secretary of the General Commission overheard me say, as a young pastor, I am focused on my local church and I could care less about anything beyond that local church. That's just who I am. That's who I'm going to be. That's where I am. And the General Secretary challenged me. The General Secretary said, Al, Gwinn, how can you possibly say that? And so he went into his challenge about the idea, who are you if God gifts you with an ability to be effective at a district or conference or general church level, that you would refuse to do what God gifted you and prepared you to do? And so he preached me a little sermon about my focus on the local church at the expense of everything else that the United Methodist Church represents. And he had a point that, of course, I've never forgotten. I needed to be aware of what he was saying and not be myopic in my approach at looking at ministry and how it can happen. And so we can make a difference. Some of you need to be involved at the district and conference and jurisdictional and general conference level. But let me just plead with you. Don't be there for the fame it brings. Please don't aspire to be in one of those roles because of what it does for your ego. That will hurt your journey with Christ, not help it. But understand that maybe if you're open, you're going to say, I'm just, if God opens the door, I'll walk through it, but I'm not going to manipulate. I'm not going to do any kind of thing that influences where I can, in the wrong way, where I should be in my ministry with God. Some of the greatest people I've ever known who will be so far ahead in the kingdom that we can't see them. I'm trying to remember the name of the person who was theologically different than John Wesley. I can't get it, but hopefully you'll Google it and you'll have it sooner than I could imagine. But anyway, this person was once asked, do you think John Wesley, will be in heaven? Their theology was so different from one another. Do you think he will be in heaven? And the answer was something like this. I'm not sure I will see him in heaven, because he will be so far up the line ahead of me that I will not be able to recognize him. I loved that answer. I love that answer. And I truly believe that there will be a bunch of nobodies in the view of this earth, and especially in our church, that will be so far ahead of me that I won't be able, if you please, to recognize them. They're beautiful people. And we have the privilege in local congregations of being among them. And we know some of them. They are rich and wonderful people. Some of them educated and some of them no education at all. Some of them a great deal of means, and others of them almost a widow's mite in regard to personal wealth. And we can vary it all along the way. And see, the beauty of what we're talking about is that we are sons and daughters of God. And the King of Kings makes no preference in who we are in stature except in our heart's love for him. That's the only issue, is that our love is great for him. In fact, I'm going to struggle and sort of give in to one of my thoughts that's flying around in my head. I will never forget, as a young pastor, I took on the assignment of moving beyond the local church, and I was in what was then called the Council of Ministries. And I'm gesturing this way because I'm in Lexington and the city is over this way, and the council was over here on New Circle Road, the offices of the council. And so my assignment was age level and family ministries. And so I'm supposed to help the entire church of 800 and whatever number of congregations we had deal with the various age levels: children, youth, young adults, and senior adults and adults, and family ministries. And part of my responsibilities was Aldersgate Camp over here outside of Urban. And so I was there visiting one day, and there was next to the camp was a small piece of property owned by an older man who had no teeth, Mr. Schuler, had a little home, as I recall it, of one bedroom and one living room and one kitchen and a bathroom, maybe. I can't remember the bathroom, but I think it was there. And a nice front porch, maybe about 8 feet out, and the width of the little house, and a rocking chair or two on the porch. Pardon me. And I was stopping to visit him one day because I wanted to be friends with him, because I thought someday we may need his property. And it'd be good to be congenial in how we try to deal with that. So I was visiting Mr. Schuler and sitting on the front porch with him. And I said, "Mr. Schuler, you have a TV?" And he said, "No, son. No, I don't have a TV." I said, I'm an ordained clergy now. I'm a young man, ordained clergy. And I should know a lot of what it means to be pursuing God and making him the center in every way of my life. I said to him, I'm thinking of my mind, what do you do with all your time? I said to him, so you don't watch TV, do you take the newspaper? He said, "No, son, I don't take the newspaper. I know." And I said, I know you sit on the porch a good bit, and I know you get out occasionally and visit, but do you go much? I didn't see a car there. I knew you couldn't go too much. And I said, "Do you go much?" And he said, "No, I don't go too much, son. I mostly sit here and rock in the chair." And I finally came to the exhaustion of saying, "So, Mr. Schuler, What do you do? He said, son, as if to say, don't you understand? He said, son, I talk to God. I just spend time with God. I'm speechless. I should be speechless. Because he's on the center. He's one of those guys that's going to be way up the line that I can't see him, that even recognize him. Because he knows what this is all about. And the interesting thing is that you and I can encourage one another to be that kind of spirit. We don't have to be like Mr. Schuler. We don't have to be without a TV. We don't have to be without the newspaper. We don't have to be without the car. We don't have to be without any of those things, but those things cannot occupy the place that God needs to be occupying in our lives. And when he becomes the center of our lives, that's when ministry begins to really take place in our local congregations. That's when effectiveness and health begins to arrive in our places of assignment. So I did want to go back to preaching just a minute or two and encourage you a little bit there. You've really earlier discovered I'm stuck on the why. And I think we can make a huge difference with our people in local congregations if we keep them focused on the why. We keep them aware of the vision. And we will be centered and focused when we have that vision. And that's so crucial for all of us. I think we're now at the point of where we'll take a break.